Silently, he stole their first kiss. Silently, he took her for the first time in the moonlight. Silently, he slipped out the back door when her husband returned. Silently, he climbed into her bedroom at midnight. Silently, he stole her heart forever. The house was dark. Only small areas of it were barely illuminated by the moonlight coming through the windows. Ron tried to maintain absolute silence as he moved through the unfamiliar darkness of the house. He moved very carefully, trying not to hit the furniture or wake the people sleeping upstairs. Ron was not a purse thief who came to cleanse the house of valuables. He was a man in love, and he came to steal something that was much more valuable to him than gold. The events that set this night in motion began a little over a week ago when Ron attended his sister's wedding. Carrie was married to her college sweetheart, and Ron was her only brother. Ron and Carrie have been close since childhood. Carrie was 2 years older than Ron, so despite his 30 years, she still considered him her little brother. The celebration was held at their parents' house, since its 14,400 square feet could accommodate 200 guests. Ron was dancing on the patio with his sister when he first saw Tracy. She stood in the living room next to the glass doors leading out to the patio. Ron guessed she was about 30 and no taller than 5'6". She had a slender but well-balanced physique and had a natural beauty that seemed to come from within. He didn't know who she was, but he immediately felt a powerful attraction to her. Ron watched her as she talked to another woman. He noticed every detail of her appearance and paid attention to her graceful legs, which fit perfectly into high-heeled shoes. His gaze slid over her, focusing on every curve of her beautiful body, from her legs to her beautiful eyes. As he looked at her, she turned her head and saw him. Their gazes intertwined for a few moments, but it seemed like it lasted much longer. She looked like an angel, and the feeling he felt when he looked at her made Ron's heart stop. Ron suddenly felt as if he had been caught in a place he shouldn't have been, and he turned away in a fit of panic. Ron smiled nervously at his sister, who noticed his confusion. She smiled back and said playfully, "She's not your type." "Eh?" was all Ron could answer. "She's married," his sister added. Ron's heart sank, but he couldn't help himself and looked again in the direction where she stood, but she was no longer there. The dance ended, and Ron began to look for this beautiful and mysterious woman. After walking around most of the house, he finally found her in the kitchen, where she was talking to his sister Carrie. When he entered the kitchen, Carrie noticed him and called him over. "There you are, Ron. Come here. I want to introduce you to someone. Tracy, this is my brother, Ron. Ron, I want you to meet Tracy. Tracy and I went to college together." There was an awkward silence for a moment. Then Tracy said, "Nice to meet you, Ron." Ron was confused, but managed to smile back and said, "Nice to meet you." Ron smiled and looked at Tracy. His heart was pounding, but he felt that luck had smiled generously on him that evening in the kitchen. He was at a loss for words, feeling awkward, and wondering what she must think of him, looking at him from across the room. What could he say to explain his actions? He couldn't just say what he felt. He wasn't even sure he understood it himself. Tracy was a truly beautiful woman in her mid-30s with a gorgeous, slender figure. But there was something else, something special about her style and graceful aura. There was something else. Ron couldn't quite describe it, but from the first glance, when their eyes met, he felt a powerful attraction to her. It won't be easy. Feeling that the time for a graceful exit had probably passed, Ron excused himself, saying that he had to go socialize with the guests. After he left the kitchen, Ron walked upstairs and out onto the second-floor balcony. He wanted to cool down a little and clear his thoughts. Ron had never felt as strongly attracted to any woman as he did to Tracy. Her presence had an intoxicating effect on him that was difficult to resist. Ron leaned against the balcony railing and tried to breathe deeply. He relaxed for a short time, thinking about this amazing woman. Her hair was blonde with a beautiful shine. He could smell her perfume and perhaps something else that he had never known before, but it made him want to be closer. Ron gradually realized that he could still smell her scent as he stood on the balcony. He inhaled and enjoyed the scent while looking up at the bright full moon. He turned to the moon like an old friend. "It's all your fault, you know that, right?" A quiet voice was heard from behind him. "I hope not." Ron, startled, turned around to see who was speaking. He saw Tracy standing there with her back against the wall. She smiled so much that in the moonlight she seemed like an angel. His heart started beating again. "I thought you were off to socialize with the guests. What made you change your mind?" Ron felt bolder, partly because of the passion he felt for her, but mostly because Tracy had come to him rather than the other way around. You made me change my mind," Ron replied. "I just stood here and thought about you." Ron walked towards her, deciding that if she hit him, it would be worth it. Without hesitation, he put his arm around her and kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss for him, it was more like him making love to Tracy with his lips. Their hug lasted much longer than either of them expected. There was no doubt that both wanted the same thing. When they parted, Ron looked at Tracy's lips. They were still damp from their encounter and sparkled in the moonlight. Ron stood back for a moment, wondering about her reaction. Will she be angry or will she be happy about their kiss? Tracy's reaction was immediate. She wrapped her arms around him and pressed her whole body against his, kissing him deeply. Ron wrapped one arm around her waist and placed the other behind her back, holding her head close to him, his fingers intertwined in her hair. Suddenly, Ron realized he was instantly aroused. Tracy noticed this too. By this point, Ron was completely overcome with powerful emotions. There he was, standing on the balcony in the moonlight, with the woman he wanted more than anything in the world, and she was in his arms, kissing him. Ron had no intention of letting her go. Tracy was not going to let him go either. A powerful hunger awoke in her, which Ron awakened with full force. Tracy's breathing became deeper, her chest heaved with passion. Ron started to get nervous at the thought of being caught with a married woman, but he was so drunk on her that he threw caution to the wind and put his hand up her dress. The feeling of Tracy's body pressed tightly against his, the smell of her skin and the sweet softness of her hair intoxicated him even more. It was as if he was in a dream, a very pleasant dream. It was all he could bear. Ron cast aside his last doubts and decided that it didn't matter if they got caught. He wanted her. He needed to have her at least once, right here, on the balcony in the moonlight. They needed to have each other. Moreover, they had to possess each other. They had sex right on the balcony. They stood there for a while, not saying a word, just holding each other. Tracy finally pulled her face away from Ron's chest and kissed him, first passionately, then finished softly. For Ron, this was the experience of a lifetime. He was not a virgin, but he had never had this experience with another woman before. Ron held Tracy in his arms for a little while longer as they stood together, but slowly reality began to creep back into their minds. Slowly, descending from sexual emotions, it began to dawn on both how dangerous their meeting was. Tracy apologized, saying she should go to the bathroom to clean herself up. Ron reluctantly agreed and removed his hand from her waist. After a quick kiss, she left. Ron lingered on the balcony for a while longer, going over in his head the moments from the first time he saw Tracy and everything that had happened since then. He looked at the moon again and asked, "What the hell do I do now?" He asked the question out loud, but there was no one nearby who could answer him. After a while, he went downstairs to have a drink. Ron was in real trouble. He knew Tracy was married and felt he had committed a serious offense, but he found her so irresistible that he knew he would do anything to be with her again. Carrie approached him with a questioning look. "Ron, where have you been? I was beginning to think you had run off with one of the few remaining single ladies." Ron laughed loudly at her suggestion and thought in his heart about the little ironies that life sometimes presents to a person. "By the way, Ron, are you still interested in my friend Tracy?" Ron's heart fluttered at that moment, fear rushing into him at the speed of light. Will his reaction give away his feelings? He tried to maintain a calm appearance, afraid to reveal everything. The attraction, the connection, the whole tangle of events. "So, interested?" she asked. "Why do you ask?" Ron answered. "Don't tell anyone I told you this. but in my opinion, Tracy's marriage won't last long." Ron felt his heart pound in his chest. He imagined it was like how it would feel to be caught with a married woman, and your husband shoots you with that brand new Thini 57 he bought just for the occasion. Ron swallowed, and his voice wavered as he tried to answer. "Why do you think so?" asked Ron. "Rumors say that her husband drinks too much and then becomes rude. He has already beaten her several times. I heard that she is not going to stand for it," Carrie answered. "Are you serious? He's hitting her?" said Ron, feeling his anger rising. "She should leave him. No one deserves to be treated like this." "I agree," Carrie replied. "She's a really good person. I think she was too naive when she got married. Her husband is a jerk who thinks he's a gift from the gods to women. She was a virgin and didn't know what she was getting into." "Thanks for the information. You are a true friend, and your new husband is a very lucky guy. I hope when I marry it will be to a woman as wonderful as you." Ron felt as if he had just been given amnesty. Everything that happened that evening made a little more sense, he hoped. Ron's mind wandered as he walked through the doorway and bumped into Tracy. Ron hesitated for a second. "Oh, sorry, I didn't notice you." "It's okay, I didn't see you either," Tracy replied. After a quick glance around, Tracy pressed the note into Ron's palm. She looked at him and whispered, "You were wonderful," and left without another word. Ron watched as Tracy and her husband drove away from the party moments later. Tracy's husband was a large man, 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing about 210 pounds, very muscular. Ron knew this was not someone he wanted to get into conflict with. After Tracy and her husband left, Ron slowly unwrapped the crumpled piece of paper that Tracy pressed into his hand. It was a short and simple message. "Call me 379-2077 from 9,000 to 15,000. Ron smiled. He wanted to see Tracy again, and now he had the opportunity. He folded the piece of paper and put it in his pocket. It was 4:10 a.m. and Ron still couldn't sleep. Memories of the evening flashed through his head like a disjointed movie. This girl was too good to be true. The meeting was like one of those cheesy fantasy stories you find in a magazine. It was real, wasn't it? Ron thought for a moment. Of course it was real. I've been there, I've done that. Ron thought he was probably going crazy. Questions ran through his head again and again. Why is Tracy still with that guy if he treats her like this? Why doesn't she just leave him? How did I even get involved in a relationship with a married woman? Ron sat back for a moment, pondering the questions that plagued his mind. When will I see her again? He wondered. He thought to himself, today is Sunday, and I have to wait until Monday to call her when her husband is at work. It will be hard. It looks like Sunday will be the longest day in human history. Monday. Ron wasn't kidding himself. He was definitely in deep water. As he picked up the phone, he felt his hand shaking uncontrollably. He misdialed the number twice before finally dialing it correctly. "Hello?" It was her. Tracy's voice was sweet and held a note of anticipation. "Hi, it's Ron." He heard Tracy's voice tremble slightly. "Hi, Ron." There was an awkward pause until Ron broke the silence and said, "I haven't been able to think about anything else but you since we met." "Me too," Tracy replied. Ron felt much more confident now, glad that she shared his feelings. He decided to become bolder and take the initiative into his own hands. "When can I see you again?" "I don't know," Tracy replied. "I've never experienced anything like this in my life," Ron said. Tracy seemed pleased with this and replied, "Me too." "So when can I see you again?" Tracy paused for a moment and then replied, "Can you come tomorrow?" To her house. It took Ron by surprise that he could even consider coming to her house. "I don't think that's wise, Tracy. Doesn't it scare you?" "Is there another place in this city where we could go without being recognized?" She had a point. The risk was high. If they went to a public place, people might see them together, and it wouldn't be good at all. "How about I come to your house? People might see me coming into your house." "I thought about it," Tracy replied. "If you park at the end of the street and walk along the alley, the back gate will be open for you." Ron didn't like this offer too much, but he would have agreed anyway. How could he refuse her? How about 11 as tomorrow? Is that convenient for you? Ron didn't even think for a second. Yes, came his answer. I will be there. Tuesday. It was 11:05 and Ron was late. He spent too long trying to choose the right bouquet of flowers for her. In the end, he decided to take pansies. After parking the car, Ron walked along the alley as he was told. As he approached the gate, he felt a mixture of fear and anticipation. Did he make the right choice? Should he turn back? No way, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and this was the girl of his dreams. There was no turning back, not now, not ever. As Ron crossed the backyard, he first noticed the house where Tracy lived. It was a huge house with 3 fireplaces and must have had at least 20 rooms. It had 2 floors with a large balcony at the top. Ron remembered their first meeting on the balcony during the wedding reception. Tracy's husband must have been rich. The house was beautiful, the backyard was large and perfectly landscaped. There were large trees around the site, blocking the view from the street. Tracy planned well for Ron to come up behind her. Ron was jealous of Tracy's husband. He had a wife most men could only dream of and a beautiful home to live in. Why did the guy who had everything treat his wife so badly? Some people just don't appreciate what they have. Tracy stood at the sliding glass door. She looked stunning. Ron smiled, enjoying the sight of Tracy's beauty. She was dressed in a silk nightgown. It was pale blue in color and reached almost to the floor. It was a sight rarely experienced by most men, except in fantasy. When he approached the door, she opened it. Ron entered the house, but didn't speak. He just looked at her as she closed the door behind them. Without a word, Tracy hugged Ron. Her body pressed completely against his. Her kiss was without a trace. Ron reacted the same way, hugging her tightly, not wanting to let go. Ron felt like he had no control over himself at all at this moment. At this moment, he belonged to Tracy and was ready to do whatever she wanted, anything. Tracy looked at him with an adoring gaze and asked, "Did you like it?" Ron couldn't speak. "Don't worry about the mess, honey. I'll take care of it, and then I'll take care of you." They started making love. Tracy, where the hell are you?" "My husband," she squeaked. Ron started to pull away, but she held him back, pleading. Ron felt nothing but panic because they were sure to be caught. "Tracy, what the hell are you doing? Where are you?" While her husband searched the upper floors, Tracy led Ron down another staircase and through the same door he had come through. Quickly gathering his clothes, she gave Ron a quick kiss. "Everything will be okay," she whispered. "Go behind the trees. There is a path there that will lead you to the gate." Once behind the trees, Ron quickly got dressed, despite how hard his heart was pounding and his body was shaking. Walking quickly along the path, he reached the end of the trees next to the gate. He looked back at the house and saw Tracy. She stood there, in her nightgown, by the sliding glass door. Her back was turned to her husband, who continued to shout at her for not answering when he called her. From his hiding place, Ron could hear Tracy's husband's voice, which was still loud, even through the closed door. Tracy smiled as she saw Ron peeking out from behind the tree. She smiled and turned, leaving with her husband, who continued to yell at her for not paying attention to him when he was talking. This was Ron's chance to escape unnoticed. Quietly slipping out the back gate, Ron made his way to his car. Ron felt guilty for leaving Tracy in this situation, but he knew that if he showed his presence, it could turn out even worse for her. It was the strangest thing that had ever happened to him, and Tracy was by far the strangest woman he had ever met. Ron thought about how Tracy had ignored her husband and then done such a risque but very sexy act at the back door. She was a strange girl, a strange and beautiful woman. As Ron sat there, it dawned on him. He knew without a shadow of a doubt that although she was sometimes difficult to understand, there was no doubt that he was madly in love with her. He leaned back in the driver's seat and breathed a sigh of relief. His heart no longer pounded in his chest and his body stopped shaking. As he started the car, Ron looked at the passenger seat, where the flowers he had bought for her still lay, never delivered. A haunting thought came over Ron at that moment. These flowers will not remain undelivered. Ron grabbed the bouquet and headed down the alley again. Having reached the gate, he placed the bouquet in the loop formed by the gate handle. Now who's the weird one here? Ron thought to himself. Driving home, Ron thought, what's next? Yes, what's next? Ron arrived home and collapsed on the sofa. His head was still spinning. Ron had always prided himself on his ability to remain cool and in control in any situation he faced, but this was a situation over which he had absolutely no control. He felt this way when he first walked up to Tracy's house. He knew he was in deep water. He was in love, and he knew that now he could not leave. Not now, not ever. It was around 19 when the phone rang. Ron was still sitting in the same spot on the couch and let the answering machine take the call. He didn't want to talk to anyone yet. Looking at his watch, he suddenly realized that he had not moved since he returned from Tracy's house. He decided to get up to check what message had been left on the answering machine. What he heard suddenly brought him back to reality. Hey, Ron, it's Tracy. I just wanted to thank you for a wonderful morning and tell you everything is fine here. And thanks for the pansies, by the way. With a click, the machine turned off and Ron stood there, facing the reality of the situation. It almost seemed like a dream. Ron had done something in the last 3 days that he never would have thought of doing before. If he had known what he would be doing in 6 days, he would never have believed it. Ron's heart began to pound again as the thought continued to swirl through his head. This is real. This is very, very real. Ron and Tracy had only been together twice, and each time they met, his feelings for her quickly became more intense. Neither of them had previously realized that a relationship could be like this. Environment. The next evening, as Ron was preparing dinner, the phone rang. It was Tracy. I have a surprise for you, she said. What a surprise? Asked Ron. My husband left on a business trip this afternoon and won't be back until tomorrow evening. Come and take your toothbrush with you. I want you to stay all night. Ron was very nervous about her plan. He felt Tracy was taking too many risks. I don't know, it's a good idea. He might come back sooner. Don't worry so much. He's never returned early before. He makes trips like this often. Tracy's voice became quieter as she said, I want to wake up next to you in the morning. Ron knew it was a bad idea, but he couldn't refuse her request. He wanted the same thing. He really wanted to wake up next to her every morning for the rest of his life. Ron agreed to go to Tracy as she requested. He decided to tell Tracy how he felt about her. He loved her and wanted to marry her. This is what he should have told her tonight. As he crossed the backyard, Ron saw her waiting for him at the door again. From his vantage point, Ron could see her entire body silhouetted against the light from inside the house. Her appearance was magnificent. Her legs were long and perfectly formed. The sight of her made his heart race. Yes, he was in love, perhaps too much in love. As he closed the distance between them, Tracy threw herself into his arms and held him as if they were separated forever. After a moment, they turned to enter the house. That's when he saw it. Tracy did a good job of hiding it with makeup, but he could still see it. Tracy had a bruise on her cheek, and her left eye was slightly blue. Ron winced at this revelation. Tracy, what happened? Did your husband find out about us? No, she replied. I told him I knew about his girlfriends, and that probably made him angry. Does he have girlfriends? Ron asked in surprise. Tracy spoke matter-of-factly. He had quite a few. I've known about a few for a long time, but I'm sure there are others that I don't know about. He told me it was none of my business, and then he got angry and hit me. So I locked myself in the bathroom and spent the whole night there. Why didn't you call the police? Asked Ron. Tracy, feeling ashamed but holding her head high in protest at what had been done to her, responded with a burst of anger. My husband is very rich, and that gives him a lot of powerful friends in this town. He also plays golf regularly with the mayor, the chief of police, and a majority of the city council. It shouldn't matter. If you call the police, they should respond. I called them a couple of times. The first time my husband met them at the door and said that the call was a mistake, and they left. The second time I met them in the yard, and the arriving officers advised me not to provoke my husband. Ron felt a surge of anger inside him. Tracy had no chance of justice against her husband. Her only choice is to leave her husband and move away from his influence. Tracy, we need to talk. Ron knew that what he had to tell her couldn't wait any longer. Tracy's voice was quiet. Not now. I've been waiting for this for so long. Let's talk later. Come with me. Tracy led Ron into the master bedroom. She didn't even bother to turn on the light when they entered. Standing there in the dark, holding each other, Ron whispered softly in Tracy's ear, "Tracy, I love you. I love you, and I want you to be with me forever." Tracy's answer came with her body pressing even more tightly against his. "I love you too, Ron, but let's not talk now. I need to be with you like this for a while longer." Ron couldn't refuse. He hugged her tightly. After a while, Tracy's hand came up to stroke the side of his face. She kissed Ron sweetly on the lips. Afterwards, they spent the night together. Ron kissed her cheek tenderly as she drifted off into a deep, contented sleep. Ron lay down next to her and covered them both with a blanket. As he lay there, Ron quietly said to the moonlight streaming through the window, "I'm really over the moon." When morning came, Tracy was the first to wake up. She lay next to Ron, thinking about the wonderful night that had passed. Tracy couldn't believe how good it felt. She admired how he was able to fill her with such pleasure and make her feel so loved and valued. She wondered if he really was that skilled at love, or if it was because they were both finally able to acknowledge their love for each other and feel free to express it in their love. However, Tracy wanted to hear from Ron that he loved her when they weren't in the heat of passion. Tracy felt as if she had finally received the love she wanted. It all seemed part of the film to her. Somehow it all didn't seem quite real. However, her husband was very real. Every time his right hand struck the side of her face, and every humiliating word that was pounded into her ears, the unyielding reality of what had been her life for the past 6 years crashed in again. Tracy couldn't explain why she allowed her husband to treat her this way and was ashamed of herself for letting it go this far. Now Ron knew about it and what he must have thought of her for allowing this abuse to continue. Ron knows. Tracy winced at her own thoughts. Ron knows that I did nothing to stop my husband from beating me. What must he think of me? Tracy thought for a moment. She looked at Ron as he slept and wondered what he really felt for her. Does he really love her? Or is it some kind of sympathy that he feels? Tracy knew that she would soon leave her husband. She wasn't sure if she would go with Ron, however. Tracy wanted Ron's love, not his pity. Tracy thought back to the previous night and the incredible sensations she had experienced. How did he do it? Tracy looked at Ron lying next to her. At that moment, the phone rang. Tracy put a finger to her lips to show Ron not to make a sound. Ron nodded in agreement. Tracy took the phone and continued rubbing her cunt along Ron's shaft. "Hello?" There was a short pause. "I'm fine. How's your trip going?" Ron felt uncomfortable with the situation. Tracy spoke into the phone again. "When are you coming home?" Tracy continued to listen to her husband's voice on the phone for a moment and then moved the phone away from her ear. Ron could hear the man's angry voice lecturing her about keeping her nose to herself. "Tracy, listen to me. I want you to be with me. I want you to move in with me. I love you very much, and I want you to move with me. I want you to be my wife." Ron knew he sounded unclear, but he hoped she would understand. Tracy looked at him and began to cry quietly. Ron was confused. "What's wrong, honey?" He wondered what could be said to make her cry. "Nothing," she replied. "You just told me the most beautiful thing you could ever say. I'm very, very happy now." At this, Ron felt relieved. "Well, will you marry me?" Tracy didn't answer. "Tracy, I love you and I want to take you away from that person who treats you like you're nothing. I want to take care of you. And most of all, Tracy, I promise to love and appreciate you for the rest of my life and even beyond. I want you to leave with me now and be with me for the rest of my life." Tracy lowered herself and kissed Ron lightly. I knew I loved you from the moment we first met. Yes, I want to marry you. Ron's heart began to pound. He was overcome with emotion. For a moment, he thought he would start crying. Tracy stood up again. There was a serious look on her face. Ron, there is one thing I have to do before I can go with you. I ask you to please try to understand. I have to do it. It's important. Tracy was silent for a moment, hoping desperately that Ron would understand. I won't be able to leave with you if I don't do this. Saturday. Tracy didn't talk to Ron for 2 days. She told him not to try to contact her. She'll contact him when she can. Tracy had a lot to think about. She knew she was taking the biggest risk in her life. If things went wrong, she could lose Ron forever. She thought about her plan 1,000 times, and just as many times she thought about giving up the whole idea. Tracy wanted to be with Ron more than anything in the world, but she had to be confident in him. As the hours passed, she refined her plan, which she believed would serve 2 purposes. First, she would know for sure that Ron really loved her. Secondly, she would take great pleasure in getting revenge on the person who had caused her so much pain over the years. Tracy berated herself for doubting Ron's intentions, but she had to be sure, she had to be absolutely sure. If she was going to leave with Ron, she wanted to give him her whole heart and soul. After all, if Ron carried out her plan, he would be more than worthy of her devotion. Ron spent the next 2 days confused. He jumped up every time the phone rang. Several friends called him to ask where he was. Ron said he had a cold and needed to rest. Time passed and Tracy still didn't call. Thoughts raced through his head. She was fine. Did her husband come back and beat her again? Has Tracy changed her mind and decided to end their relationship? The tension began to take its toll on him. He could not eat, and his sleep was full of dozens of scattered dreams that he could not understand. Ron's greatest fear was that he would be used, or worse, teased. Ron decided to consult a trusted friend whose wedding he was attending when this all started. He took the phone and then quickly put it back. No, he should discuss this with her personally. When he opened the front door of his apartment, the figure that stood there stunned him. Ron paused for a moment. Tracy, I wasn't expecting you. How did you know where I live? She stood there for a moment and smiled at Ron. I didn't mean to scare you, Ron. I was just stopping by for a minute. Tracy's voice sounded strangely distant to Ron, his fears beginning to surface again. Could she come to finish everything? The thought was unbearable for Ron. Well, Tracy spoke again. Aren't you going to invite me in? Sorry. Please come in. Ron started stuttering again. Tracy crossed the threshold and immediately turned to face Ron. Ron quickly closed the door, fearing that someone might see Tracy in his apartment and somehow reveal their secret date. As soon as Ron closed the door, Tracy was already on the move. She suddenly threw herself into his arms, causing Ron to stagger back against the wall behind him in surprise. Tracy hugged Ron and held him tightly. Ron felt Tracy's body tremble as he held her in his arms. Ron, I've missed you so much. There was a hint of desperation in Tracy's voice. Are you ready? Are you ready to leave? Asked Ron. Tracy stepped back from Ron for a moment and looked into his eyes as if she was searching for something. Ron, do you really love me? I really need to know how committed you are, how much you've thought about this. If I leave my husband, I'll also have to leave this town. He has too many powerful friends in this town, and I know that he will never give us peace while we are here. This means that if you want to be with me, you will also have to pack your things and leave this city. Ron had tears in his eyes as he said without hesitation, Yes, I love you, honey. I love you so much that I can't imagine life without you. Tracy, I want you to leave with me. I want to get married on you and be with you until the end of our days. Ron stepped forward to hug Tracy, but she quickly backed away. Ron, there's one more thing. I need your help with something. If you help me, I can leave with you. Ron fell silent. He wondered what she might ask him to do. Has Tracy considered killing her husband? No, she was not capable of such a thing. Ron looked at Tracy for a moment and then spoke. "What do you want me to do?" asked Ron. Tracy sat down on the sofa and motioned for Ron to sit next to her. "I have a plan." Tracy told Ron her plan in detail. She felt relieved to finally speak out. Her only concern now was what Ron would think of her now that he knew her plan. Ron sat for a minute, going over in his head what Tracy had just asked him to do. He saw a certain genius in her plan, and this was complemented by an interesting irony. It was a big risk, but it was worth it if it meant he could have Tracy for the rest of his life. Tracy waited for Ron's response, but couldn't wait any longer. "What do you think of my plan?" she asked. Ron laughed for a moment. "Well, it's pretty crazy, but it has style. I don't know why, but I like it." Tracy felt relieved. Her words seemed to wash away all the fears that had tormented her for the last 2 days. Ron took her hand in his. "How soon can we do this? I want to have you around as soon as possible." Hugging Ron, Tracy held him tightly. Tears flowed down her cheeks. Ron hugged her. As he held her in his arms, he spoke softly into her ear. "I love you, Tracy. I love you so much that I can't believe how lucky I am to have met you. And I'm so happy that you're in love with me too." Tracy was crying even harder now. She had never felt so loved in her entire life. She felt warm and safe in Ron's arms. She felt his love for her so clearly that there could no longer be any doubt. She knew that he was the person she would be with for the rest of her life. Tracy thought for a moment that she could give up on her plan and just leave with Ron, but no, she had to do it. She had to. Ron felt like he had just been given a wonderful gift. Tracy would be with him. He was eager to continue her plan so they could finally be together. "How soon can we do this?" Ron asked again. Tracy's response caught him off guard. "How about Monday night?" she suggested. This left only one day to prepare for Tracy's plan. They agreed on Monday at midnight as the right time to execute her plan. Monday. Ron looked at his watch. It was 11:48 p.m. He was right on time. In his hand, he had a small gift for Tracy, a single flower. He crossed her backyard and carefully repeated in his mind how he would get through her house. The glass door was open, just like she said it would be. The house was unlit, just as expected. As soon as he entered the house, Ron stood in the shadows for a few moments to collect his nerves and let his eyes adjust to the darkness. Moonlight barely filtered through the windows, making it even harder to see. Ron decided it was time and began making his way through the house. Fear grew inside him. There was no room for mistakes tonight. He had to do everything perfectly, otherwise it could lead to disaster. Ron placed his foot on the first step of the stairs. As he slowly shifted his weight onto her, he was mindful that the steps might creak and alert Tracy's husband. His ears strained, trying to detect any sounds from the house, but he was met only by silence. The time it took to reach the top of the stairs seemed like an eternity. He felt great inner relief that he had gotten to this point undetected. At the same time, his fear increased as he approached his final goal. Ron paused at the top of the stairs for a moment, hoping to give himself time to calm down. Never in his life had he done something like this, entering someone else's house in the middle of the night like a thief. Ron looked around the corridor that led from the top of the stairs. It seemed longer than it actually was. Ron moved slowly down the corridor, drawing courage from the progress he had already made. At the end of the hallway were double doors leading to the master bedroom where Tracy and her husband slept. Approaching the doors, Ron looked into the bedroom. The moonlight enveloped the room in a soft, mysterious light. He could see Tracy and her husband lying in bed and heard every breath of her husband, who slept next to him. Ron's entire body trembled with a mixture of excitement and fear. Carefully, he entered the room, pausing with each step, trying not to make a sound. Ron looked towards the window, where moonlight poured into the room. The moonlight added tension to the moment, its mysterious light creating an effect that distorted perception. It made everything look different than it actually was. Ron noticed a flicker of movement from the corner of his eye. His heart raced as he turned his head to see what it was. Tracy's hand reached out from under the blankets. Her hand beckoned him to come closer. Ron should have known she was awake, but her stillness made him think otherwise. Ron quickly walked over to Tracy and knelt down next to her. Her hand lightly touched his shoulder, helping to calm his nerves. It was a moment that defined Ron and Tracy's future together. If he did what was planned, they would have their whole lives together. If not, Ron knew their future was uncertain at best. Ron reached under the blanket where Tracy lay motionless. His hand touched the skin of her thigh. Her skin was warm to the touch and as smooth as one could imagine. It started, there was nowhere to retreat. Tracy reacted immediately as Ron slowly ran his hand down the length of her leg. Ron paused for a moment, afraid that her reaction would give away what they were doing. Tracy didn't feel the way she thought she would. She thought she would feel a mixture of fear and revenge. Instead, she felt a strange feeling of excitement. It was as if a thief, some kind of thief, had come into her house at night and was now taking his freedom. He didn't come for money or jewelry. He came to steal something else. She was the target of a theft. It was she who he came to pick up. When his hand touched her body, he stole her right from under her husband's nose. Tracy lay there allowing this man to steal this forbidden thing from her husband. She realized that this was exactly what she wanted from her strange, but somehow erotic plan. She wanted this forbidden thing stolen from her husband, right from under his nose. Her husband had always been so arrogant in his infidelities with other women, and now it was her turn. He had beaten her so many times during their marriage, challenging her to fight. Many times he boasted that a woman belonged to him as soon as she was in his bed. This was her final revenge, to be stolen in such a bold and erotic way. To be taken by a man while her husband lay nearby was the perfect revenge. As Ron turned to leave, there was a muffled noise from the bed. Ron turned around and heard it again. It was her husband. It sounded like he was trying to say something, but Ron couldn't figure out what. Tracy calmly got out of bed, walked over to Ron and hugged him. "Now I'm yours, my love." Some other sounds were heard from the bed. Ron glanced back at the bed, fearing a confrontation with Tracy's massive husband. "Are you ready to leave now, or do you want more?" she asked. Ron's fear and confusion quickly grew. He looked at Tracy's husband and wondered why he couldn't talk and why he stayed in bed. "Have you ever asked me what I did before I got married?" Tracy asked. "No," Ron replied. "I was a nurse," she replied, putting her hand down Ron's pants. Her hand surprised him. "Don't worry, we still have about 30 minutes before he can even get out of bed." "What?" "I wanted him to see it all. I wanted him to be conscious and see everything. I wanted that bastard to know that I was taken right from under his nose. It was easier than I thought. That's it. What I had to do was call an old friend I worked with when I was a nurse, and she got me what I needed. The drug acts as a muscle relaxant. In large doses, it causes complete paralysis. So that the patient was awake during the procedure, but at the same time completely motionless, I slipped him into the drink that he brought with him to bed, and after 5 minutes he could not move a single muscle." Tracy walked over to the bed and stood over her husband, turning on the light next to the bed. Her husband's eyes were open and sparkling at her. "Come here, there's something else I want to show you," she said. She pulled back the sheet that covered her husband. His naked body lay motionless as he struggled to speak. She went to her closet and pulled out a Polaroid camera, taking several pictures of her husband lying naked and motionless. "Tracy, what are you doing? We need to leave," Ron said. "Don't worry, we still have plenty of time. I'm just taking out a small insurance policy for us. I also promised a copy to my friend who got me the drug," Tracy smiled. Suddenly, she rushed to the bathroom to get her lipstick. Tracy knew time was running out, but she wanted her revenge to be complete. Returning to her husband, she used lipstick to write something on his stomach and then took a few more pictures. Ron laughed when he saw what she had written on her husband's stomach. In neat red letters, it was written, "I have a small," and an arrow pointed to his small dignity. Tracy looked at the photos as the images began to appear, then smiled and selected one of the photos. Holding it in front of her husband's face so he could get a good look at her, Tracy said in a calm voice, "These pictures are my insurance. If you try to follow Ron and me or do anything, I give you my word that it's either me or one of my friends who will spread copies of these photos all over the city and on the internet for everyone to see, and there's nothing you can do about it." She leaned closer to her husband. Her voice sounded with a hint of anger. "Do you hear me, bastard? I never want to see you again." Tracy quickly got dressed and packed a couple of suitcases with clothes. Turning to Ron, she kissed him. "Are you ready to go?" she asked. Ron nodded and took her suitcases. Tracy turned off the light next to the bed, leaving her husband lying naked and motionless in the dim moonlight. They walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and towards the front door. "Honey, please start the car and pull up to the front entrance. I just want to grab a couple more things while you drive," Tracy said. Ron ran out of the house and ran to his car. Starting the car, he quickly drove to Tracy's house. Stopping the car, he got out and quickly opened the trunk. After picking up the suitcases he had left at the front door, he carried them to the car and put them in the trunk. Tracy came out with a box of personal items and handed it to Ron. Ron put the box in the trunk and then followed Tracy back to the front door of the house. Tracy reached for the door and slammed it shut. She had a smile on her face as she walked down the path towards Ron's car. The light turned on in the bedroom on the second floor. Ron noticed this and motioned for Tracy to hurry up, but she continued to walk slowly, as if without any urgency. The figure of Tracy's husband appeared on the bedroom window. He opened the window with a bang and started screaming. "Tracy! Tracy, what are you doing? Tracy, you little bitch! Get back here!" Tracy did not pay attention to her husband's screams. Her step along the path remained unchanged. Ron slowly realized that she was doing all this on purpose, as a final act of defiance. Ron smiled to himself and felt proud of the courage she was showing as she continued to calmly walk down the path, smiling and playing with the flower Ron had given her. Her husband continued to scream from the window without leaving it, probably unable to walk, so screaming from the window was his only option at that moment. Ron was relieved when they reached his car and Tracy turned around and hugged him. "I love you, Ron. Thank you for doing this for me. I hope you understand. I just had to do it this way." "I'm not sure I fully understand this, but there is one thing I am sure of. I know that I love you, and more than anything, I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Are you ready to leave?" "Not yet," she replied. Turning to her husband, who was still shouting from the window, her voice sounded cheerful as she addressed him one last time. "Bye, darling. I won't be back, bye." With that, she turned to Ron and said, "I'm ready now. Take me home, darling." She kissed Ron tenderly, and without a word, they both got into the car and drove away from the house. As they drove down the street, Ron looked at Tracy and smiled. "Darling, I want to ask you one thing." "Whatever," Tracy replied. Ron smiled as he looked at her. "I want you to remind me to never make you angry." Tracy laughed as they drove off into the night. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.